Hello children, today we shall start with our third chapter, that is water. So let's see what we will cover in this chapter. The image that you can see on your screen is a structure of water molecule. A water molecule is a V-shaped molecule with the oxygen atom at one end and two hydrogen atoms connected to the oxygen atom. There is a small negative charge on the oxygen atom, whereas the hydrogen atoms have a very small or a delta positive charge. The bond angle for water molecule is 104.5 degrees. What we know about water? We know that water can be recycled. Water undergoes changes in its state. And water gets evaporated. It gets condensed. And the cycle continues. Let's see the physical properties of water. Water is colorless, tasteless and odorless. Its boiling point is 100 degrees Celsius. Freezing point is 0 degrees Celsius. The maximum density of water is at 4 degrees Celsius. What does this mean? It means that at 4 degrees, water has its maximum density. As water keeps on expanding on freezing, the maximum density it reaches is at 4 degrees. And therefore, we notice that ice has a relatively low density than water, and hence ice can float on water. And what is the use of this point, or where do we see, how does it help us? Since water floats on ice, water can be used for aquatic life and animal life. So why do we have aquatic and animal life inside the sea or inside frozen lakes? Is because the water density is more than that of the ice, and ice floats over water. The next is anomalous expansion of water. What is this anomalous expansion of water? Water has a unique physical property that when cooled, it first contracts in its volume, just like other liquids. But below 4 degrees, it starts to expand. And this continues till the temperature reaches 0 degrees. So between 4 and 0 degrees, what we see, that water starts expanding instead of contracting. So this is the reason why we have aquatic life. So this is the anomalous expansion of water. The next 2 points are the latent heat of fusion of ice, which is 336 joules per grams, and latent heat of vaporization of water, which is 2268 joules per grams. So what is the latent heat? It is that heat that is required to change the state of matter. So whether it is the latent heat of fusion of ice, that is converting all water into ice or converting all liquid into gas. The next topic that we are going to see is water as a universal solvent. So what is a solvent? Solvent is that substance which can dissolve solutes inside it. So water not only dissolves solids, but it can also dissolve gases and other liquids. So that is why water is called as a universal solvent. Water, it has a high dielectric constant, and the specific heat capacity of water is 4.2 joules. What does this mean when it has a high specific heat? It has a high specific heat, and that is why it is used as a coolant. Water can be used as a coolant. Why? Because its specific heat is very high. It can absorb heat energy for a long time, and hence it is used in coolants of motor car radiators, coolers, air conditioners, etc. Now next topic is solution. What is a solution? It is a homogeneous mixture of two or more components whose composition may be gradually changed by changing the relative amounts of the components. So by changing the relative amount of components, we can change the composition. So this is a homogeneous mixture of two or more components. Now is a solution only meant between a solid and a liquid? No. It could be two gases, it could be two liquids, it could be solid and a liquid, or even two solids. Now what is a two solid solution? We will see that later. That is also called as alloys. The characteristics of true solution. So how will you identify that it is a true solution? It has to first of all be homogeneous. The solute particles should be very small, that is about 10 to the power minus 10 meters in size. That is really small particles. The next point is it has to be clear and transparent. It does not scatter light. What does it mean? If you take a torch and put into the solution, the light will not get scattered. It will just pass through. So that is the important characteristics of solution. Next, its component cannot be separated by filtration. So if you have a sugar solution and you just strain it with a tea strainer, can you separate sugar from the solution? No. So that's exactly what this point means. Now let's see types of solutions. We have two types of solutions. One is called the aqueous solution and one is the non-aqueous solution. So what is an aqueous solution? Aqua means water. So aqueous solution means where the solvent is water. Such solutions are called as aqueous solution. So if there is presence of water in the solution, we call it as an aqueous solution. And any other solution where water is not present as a solvent is called as a non-aqueous solution. So non-aqueous solution could be sulfur and carbon disulfide and so on. There are many different examples here. So anything that does not contain water but is a solution is called a non-aqueous solution. Types of solutions can also be defined as dilute solutions and concentration solutions. So what are dilute solutions? If the percentage of solute in the solution is less and there is more amount of solvent or water, then it's called as a dilute solution. And where the quantity or percentage of solute is more and the amount of water is less or totally absent, such solutions are called as concentrated solution. In types of solutions, we have one more classification here, that is saturated solution, unsaturated solution and supersaturated solution. If you see the image, we see that the color in the solution is deepening. So the first three could be considered as unsaturated solution. Like you keep on adding more and more solute to it, it is able to take it. So the solvent is able to dissolve more and more solute in that without change in temperature. So it's readily accepting more solute. So such solutions are called unsaturated. They are not yet saturated. They are not tired. They are not filled up. They are not filled. So unsaturated solution. Now let's see the next type, that is saturated solutions. Although it's written in the point first here, what is saturated? The solution which cannot take any more solute at that particular temperature. The solvent which cannot take any more solute at that temperature. So more solute cannot be added into a particular solution, then such a solution is called as a saturated solution. By the word saturated means enough. It is just enough. So it's a saturated solution. The last one here is supersaturated. Now once you have a saturated solution and if you keep on adding more solute to it, what happens? It is just going to go and settle at the bottom. But now if you heat it, we have seen in kinetic energy theory. So when you start heating, the molecules will start vibrating and there will be little more space between the molecules. So the solute will dissolve and take in the spaces of this molecule. So when you heat a saturated solution, more solute can be dissolved and such a solution is called as a supersaturated solution. So three types of solutions here: unsaturated, saturated and supersaturated, based on the levels of saturation or level of solute present into the solution. Next we have something as concentration of solution. So what is the percentage concentration of a solution? So percentage concentration of the solution could be the mass of the solute upon the mass of the solution into 100. So how do we find out percentage? So we have to find out the concentration here. So concentration depends on how much solute is present. So mass of solute upon mass of solution into 100 will give you concentration percentage. Now let's see the volume percentage. Suppose you want to know the volume. So volume of the solute upon the volume of the solution into 100 will give you the volume percentage. Now let's see the definition of solubility. Solubility of a solute in a particular solvent at a given temperature is equivalent to the maximum number of grams of the solute necessary to saturate 100 grams of that solvent at that temperature. So what is solubility? It is how much of solute can dissolve in the particular solvent at a particular temperature. That is its solubility. How soluble is a substance? That's the solubility. What are the factors that will affect solubility? The first factor is size of particles. The next is stirring. And the third is temperature. You imagine if you have got candy sugar. So the granules are very large. If you take candy sugar and put it in water, then you take sugar of a normal granulated size and you take powdered sugar and you add into 3 glasses. What we see, the powdered sugar will be dissolved very quickly. So it shows high solubility. Why does it show? Because the size of the solute was small. So the size of particles is very important factor in affecting the solubility. The next is stirring. What happens in stirring? You are moving the solute into the solvent or into the solution. You are moving the solute into the solvent or into the solution, and with this process continuous collisions are taking place. The solute particles will be continuously dashing the solvent particles and thus entering into the intermolecular spaces. So stirring will increase the solubility. It's also with the temperature. If you increase the temperature, what happens? If you increase the temperature, the distance between the particles of the solvent will start increasing, and that will accept more and more solute. So hence, by increasing temperature, we also increase the solubility. Let's see the solubility curve. The solubility curve that we see here shows that with increase in temperature, the solubility is increased. Children, I'd like you to note that sodium chloride shows an increase, but it is a very, very small increase. The increase in the solubility of sodium chloride with temperature is so gradual that it's almost, it looks like a straight line. So there's a question that's often asked, which of the salts show a very gradual or no increase in solubility with temperature? So the answer here will be sodium chloride. We also have one salt, calcium sulfate, which increases with temperature. The solubility increases with temperature to around 50 degrees. And after 50 degrees also, the solubility decreases. So why do we have this solubility curves? What's the use of it? So first of all, it is used to determine the solubility of a substance at a particular temperature. Then second, the effect of cooling on hot solutions of different substances can be found from the curve. We also have one formula here for solubility. It's just like the volume percentage and concentration percentage. So solubility can be defined or can be expressed as mass of a solute in grams upon mass of solution in maybe milliliters into 100. So this will give the solubility of a particular salt or solute. The effect of temperature and pressure on solubility of water in gases. As already discussed in the previous slide, gases can be dissolved in water. An example of this is when oxygen is dissolved in water or carbon dioxide is dissolved in water. It plays an important role for plant and animal life. So also, let's see what effect solubility of gases have in water when temperature and pressure comes into concentration. Increase in pressure on the surface of water. Suppose the pressure on the water surface is increased. What happens? The solubility will increase. So if there is a pressure added to water surface, the solubility of the gas will increase. Next, Increase in temperature of the water decreases the solubility of gases. Suppose you start boiling water. We see that before reaching boiling point, we can see some bubbles coming out of water. Why does it happen? It happens because gases will escape. Gases present in water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, will start escaping. So this starts happening much before the boiling point. So increase in temperature decreases solubility of gases in water. So the gases which were otherwise soluble in water, when the temperature is increased, they escape from water. The next topic here is crystals. Most of you must have seen many types of crystals. They would be seen in jewelries. They are seen in different salts present at home, etc. A crystal is a homogeneous solid of definite geometrical shape. It has symmetrically arranged smooth plane surfaces which meet, forming sharp edges. So crystal's definition will be, it's a homogeneous solid of a geometrical shape which has smooth plane surfaces and sharp edges. So these two are very important points of a crystal. The next definition we have is crystallization. The process in which crystals of a substance are obtained on cooling a hot saturated solution is called crystallization. So basically we can say formations of crystal from a saturated solution is called as crystallization. The next concept is water of crystallization. So it is a fixed amount of water that is associated with some compounds which is the integral part of their crystalline structure is called as water of crystallization. We have two examples here, blue vitriol, that is copper sulfate. Copper sulfate dot 5H2O. What is the formula for this? Is CuSO4 dot 5H2O. It means that every molecule of blue vitriol consists of one molecule of copper sulfate and 5 molecules of water attached to it. So the water molecules which attach to it are called as water of crystallization. And we have green vitriol, which is ferrous sulfate dot 7H2O. So that is 7 molecules of water attached with ferrous sulfate crystal with 1 molecule of ferrous sulfate to give a crystal of green vitriol or ferrous sulfate crystals, you can say. Hydrated substances. So as we saw that which substances contain water of crystallization, they are called as hydrated substances. What is the meaning of hydration? Presence of water. So the salts or the substances which contain water of crystallization, the same examples here, copper sulfate, ferrous sulfate, both these crystals come along with water of crystallization, or both these salts come along with water of crystallization, and hence they are called as hydrated substances. We also have anhydrous substances. And what are anhydrous substances? They are those substances which do not contain any water of crystallization. There could be some salts which do not have this water of crystallization. For example, common salt like sodium chloride does not have water of crystallization, and hence it is called as anhydrous substance. The next phenomena that we have here is efflorescence. So what is efflorescence? A phenomena where a compound loses its water of crystallization on exposure to dry air is called as efflorescence. That means if you take some substance or some salt that contains water of crystallization and place it in the open, expose it to dry air, what is seen? It is noticed that it loses the water of crystallization. So it loses its crystalline form to convert into an amorphous powder, or just loses some part of the water of crystallization to form a lower number of water molecules in its crystal. So such effect is called as a efflorescence effect. So the phenomena is called as efflorescence, and the substances that show such a phenomena, they are called as efflorescent substances. So what are the examples of efflorescent substances? We have washing soda, Globus salt and Epsom salt. So if you have Epsom salt, Globus salt or washing soda and you place them in dry atmospheric air, if you place it in the open, we notice that it loses its crystalline form and becomes into a dry amorphous powder. So as we can see in the picture, the figure to your right hand side shows crystalline washing soda, and on to your left hand side shows amorphous washing soda. So when it is kept in the open, when you expose it to open, after a while it gets dry, it becomes amorphous in nature instead of the crystalline nature. The next one is deliquescent. Certain water-soluble compounds, when exposed to atmosphere at ordinary temperatures, what happens? They absorb moisture from the atmospheric air. So in our previous case, in efflorescence, we saw that the substances lose water of crystallization. Here in deliquescence are those substances which absorb moisture even from the atmospheric air, and the substance itself becomes moist. They lose their crystalline form and ultimately dissolve in that water, forming a saturated solution. So the substance will absorb moisture from the atmosphere. We know water vapor is present in the air. So it will absorb moisture from that water vapor from the air, and it will even dissolve in it. Naturally, it is going to form a saturated solution. Why? Because the amount of water which is present in air is very, very less. So it forms a saturated solution. So such a phenomena is called as a deliquescence. Such a phenomena is called deliquescence, and the substances are called deliquescent substances. The example here, caustic soda, caustic potash, and ferric chloride. What is this caustic soda? That is sodium hydroxide. Caustic potash, potassium hydroxide. We need to learn them by their names also, by their formulas also. Caustic soda, sodium hydroxide, caustic potash, potassium hydroxide. And we have ferric chloride as well. So if you have the substances, caustic soda flakes as you see it on your screen, they are very much crystalline in nature. But when you leave it in the open, if it is present even in the bottles in the lab, we see that after a while it forms a liquid on top. The white color substance is dissolved down and it just forms a liquid on top. Means even that little bit air, if the bottle is half filled with caustic soda, can convert into liquid layer on top. Why? It will absorb moisture from the air present in the bottle. And ferric chloride, we have seen it is a reddish brown or brownish powder. It will get into a dark brown liquid by absorbing, it will convert into a dark brown liquid by absorbing moisture from the air. So this is how you just see the difference once it is exposed to air, how it changes its look or its color. The next concept is that of hygroscopic substances. So what is hygroscopy? Hygroscopy is a phenomena where certain substances absorb moisture from the atmosphere when they are exposed to it, but it is not enough for them to form solution, and hence they do not dissolve in it. Means it has that capability to absorb moisture, but not up to that extent that it is going to form a saturated solution or a solution. It will just absorb moisture. So such substances are called as hygroscopic substances, and the process or the phenomena is called as hygroscopy. So let's see what are the examples of hygroscopic substances, that is concentrated sulfuric acid, phosphorus pentaoxide, and quicklime. So these are hygroscopic substances. So what they can do, they will absorb moisture, but they are not going to dissolve in that. They are not going to form a solution of it. Next we will see, that's the drying agents. Drying agents are also called as desiccants. These are substances that can readily absorb moisture from other substances. So what is a drying agent? Just imagine a towel or a hand towel. What does a towel do? It wipes off the water from the surface that you're trying to wipe off. So it has the capability of removing water. So when water is in liquid form, it can just dry it. So these substances like concentrated sulfuric acid, phosphorus pentaoxide, and quicklime are called drying agents. They are capable of drying maybe gases or any other substances. Next we have dehydrating agents. Dehydrating agents also, they remove water molecules from substance. But the difference between a drying and dehydrating agent is dehydrating agent enters into the chemical formula and removes any hydrogen and oxygen in the ratio of water. So if there is carbohydrates, which is C6H12O6, it will remove all the H12O6 out of it and only carbon will be left. So this is the effect that a dehydrating agent has. So what is dehydrating? It goes inside the molecular structure and removes the water. What does a drying agent do? Drying agent just removes water which is present. It does not enter any molecular formula. Just it removes water which is present, and dehydrating substances can remove even the chemically combined water molecules from the compounds. Which is a agent, dehydrating agent, that's sulfuric acid. So sulfuric acid can be used as both drying agent also and as dehydrating agent also. Drying agent, generally it is used for many gases, to dry gases. So till now we have covered universal solvent, physical properties, various types of solutions, solubility, water of crystallization, and because of water of crystallization, whichever other effects we have seen like efflorescence, deliquescence, hygroscopy, and also drying agent and dehydrating agent. Now we move on to the next topic, that is soft water. Water is said to be soft if it readily forms lather with soap. So if you find that you use soap and water and it gives a good amount of lather, means those bubbles will form very easily, then we can say that this water is soft water. Then what is hard water? Naturally, when it will not lather, which the water is said to be hard when it does not readily form lather with soap. Then what happens if it is not forming a lather? It just forms a whitish color scum or whitish color layer on top of the water. So you will not get many bubbles. So then that water is called to be hard water. What is the reason for water to become hard? So let's see what is the source of water. So what are the sources of water? One is rainwater. Okay. Next is spring, wells, rivers, ponds. So we see that water comes in contact with the earth's surface. So when it is in contact with the earth's surface, it's a universal solvent. So it dissolves a lot of salts and minerals in it. And some of the salts and minerals which are present in the water give hardness to water. So what are the causes of water hardness? That is when water contains hydrogen carbonate of calcium and magnesium, that is bicarbonate of calcium and magnesium, then it is called as temporary hard water. So when water is flowing over a stone, that stone would have been maybe a calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is insoluble in water, so it is not going to mix. But over a period of time, if it collects, if it reacts with oxygen, if it reacts with water and carbon dioxide, it can form calcium bicarbonate, and calcium bicarbonate will cause water to get hard temporarily. So how does it happen? When carbon dioxide mixes with water, water forms carbonic acid. So CO2 plus H2O gives us H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. This carbonic acid reacts with calcium carbonate. It reacts with calcium carbonate to give us calcium bicarbonate. Now calcium carbonate does not dissolve in water, but calcium bicarbonate can dissolve in water. And because this salt is dissolved in water, it gives hardness to water. When calcium carbonate will not dissolve, it is going to precipitate or it's going to be separated from water. So hence calcium carbonate does not cause any hardness, whereas calcium bicarbonate, because it is soluble in water, causes hardness of water. Next we see stalactites and stalagmites. So what are these? What are these structures? They are structures formed due to the presence of calcium bicarbonate. So in many limestone caves, we see that water keeps on trickling down through the cracks of the rocks. That time, conical structures from the roof downwards and from the floor upwards are formed. So the structures which are formed from the roof downwards are called stalactites, whereas the structures which are formed from the floor to the roof, they are called stalagmites. So what structures these are? These are structures which are made up of calcium bicarbonate or calcium carbonate. Now we'll see the types of hardnesses. We have two types of hardness for water. One is temporary hardness and the other is permanent hardness. So temporary hardness is that which contains only hydrogen carbonates of calcium and magnesium. So when we have calcium bicarbonate or calcium hydrogen carbonate, it's one and the same. Whether we say calcium bicarbonate, it could also be referred to as calcium hydrogen carbonate. So calcium bicarbonate and magnesium bicarbonate, they give temporary hardness to water. So now let's see permanent hardness. What's permanent hardness? Water that contains chlorides and sulfates of calcium and magnesium cause permanent hardness to water. So which are those salts? Calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, calcium sulfate and magnesium sulfate. So if we have calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, calcium sulfate or magnesium sulfate present in the water, then these salts will cause permanent hardness to water. What are the advantages of hard water? So the first advantage that we see here is it provides calcium for bones and teeth. We know that water contains, which is maybe from the wells, spring, bore wells, it contains some kind of minerals, and these minerals are required for our body. They are required for the bones and for teeth. Next, it provides good taste. So water without any salt or minerals present in it will be very flat, but with added minerals it has a better taste. Such water is also used for making aerated drinks and various other drinks. The third advantage that we have of hard water is that it checks lead poisoning. When lead is present in water, it reacts with some of the compounds and forms an insoluble lead compound which is held back by the pipes, and hence the water coming in from the tap is free from lead. So thus there is a big advantage of using hard water, that even if there is a very small presence of lead, it does take care of the lead poisoning. Disadvantages of hard water. Now you can see on your screens that these are the images of taps or showers or different other household items which get spoiled or corroded over a period of time due to presence of hard water. What happens? A layer of this forms on top of the surface. So it takes away the shine of the particular metal. It takes away its luster. Not only that, the surface starts getting eroded. Hard water is unfit for washing purpose. As we already discussed, hard water is that water which does not form good amount of soap, or it does not form good amount of lather with soap. The next we see is cleansing action of soap. So as we see, soap molecules have two ends. One is the hydrophobic end and one is the hydrophilic end. The hydrophobic end is the end that does not like water. It is having phobia for water. It gets attracted to oil, dirt or grease. And the hydrophilic end is the end which likes water and which will try to move or be in the presence of water. So what happens is all the hydrophobic ends go around the dirt molecule and stick to it. And they try to cover it from all the sides. But at the same time, the hydrophilic ends want to be in water, and thus the hydrophilic ends take out the dirt and move in water. So this is the cleansing action of soap. Now let's see removal of temporary hardness. So what is the cause of temporary hardness? The cause of temporary hardness of water is presence of bicarbonates of calcium and magnesium. So on boiling, the bicarbonates of calcium and magnesium, they decompose into insoluble carbonates, and these can be removed by filtration. So when calcium bicarbonate On boiling, it will decompose to give us calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is insoluble in water. We also have carbon dioxide and water as the products of this reaction. So very easily we can remove the insoluble calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate from water. Thus we can get rid of temporary hardness here. Next one is removal of calcium carbonate or bicarbonate by the process of Clark's process. In this process, lime is added to precipitate out as calcium carbonate and magnesium hydroxide, which are then removed by filtration. So if you have calcium carbonate, it reacts with lime that is calcium hydroxide. It gives us calcium carbonate and water. So calcium carbonate can be filtered out very easily. Now if we have even magnesium carbonate present in that, so magnesium carbonate with calcium hydroxide will give us magnesium carbonate and it will give us water as well. So both the carbonates can be removed at the same time. So thus we will get rid of the temporary hardness. So this second process is called the Clark's process. There's one more method of removing temporary hardness, that is by adding washing soda. So if you treat hard water with washing soda, in this case also calcium sulfate plus sodium carbonate gives us calcium carbonate and sodium sulfate, and calcium chloride plus sodium carbonate gives us calcium carbonate plus NaCl. So here in both the cases we see that calcium carbonate is precipitated, and once it is precipitated, that is, it is in solid state, it is insoluble and we can easily filter it out. So washing soda also helps removing temporary hardness. How do we remove permanent hardness? To remove permanent hardness, we have to use something called as zeolite. So a zeolite is used. Hard water is allowed to enter and zeolite or permutate is used, and it just passes through the column of zeolite or permutate, and soft water is removed out. We have also sodium chloride that is marked on the right hand side. There is an entry for sodium chloride solution. It's also called as brine. This is taken care to replenish zeolite. So to replenish zeolite from time to time, we need to have sodium chloride solution coming in over there. The other method for softening of hard water is using ion exchange resin. What's an ion exchange resin? So there is a column there where the exchange of ions take place. We know that some metals are more reactive than the others, like sodium and potassium are more reactive. So if you have sodium ions, they are going to replace the magnesium or calcium ions, and thus we see that the water can be softened by removing the ions with the ion exchange. So with that we complete this chapter, water, that topics that we have covered here. Now hard water, soft water, advantages of hard water, disadvantages of hard water, and how to remove hardness of water, that is removal of hardness of water. So I hope that all the topics that we have covered in this chapter are clear. Thank you.